There comes a moment in every great thinker's life when the very ground beneath them breaks apart. For Carl Jung, that moment was the day he walked away from Sigmund Freud. They had been close, almost like father and son. Freud believed Jung was his intellectual heir, the one to carry the torch of psychoanalysis into the future. But Jung had seen something Freud didn't want to see. Something deeper, stranger, more dangerous. He saw the soul, not just the mechanical inner workings of the psyche, not just trauma, repression, or childhood wounds. He felt the presence of something alive inside himself, something that whispered in dreams and moved beneath thought. And when he tried to speak about it, Freud rejected him. That's when it all began to fall apart. Jung entered what he would later call his confrontation with the unconscious, a time that was so intense, so overwhelming, that he thought he might actually be losing his mind. He stopped seeing patients. He withdrew from social life. He spent hours alone, walking by the lake near his home in Küsnacht, Switzerland. He could feel something bubbling up from below. A storm, not outside, but within. He wrote in his journal, "I had to let myself plummet down into the depths. What I had previously done was to skim over the surface, but now I had to penetrate into the depths." He was not exaggerating. Visions began. Strange dreams. He saw rivers of blood flooding Europe, years before World War I ever began. He saw apocalyptic images, prophets, gods, demons. Most people would have run, would have tried to drown it in distraction, medication, or denial. But not Jung. He leaned in. He set aside every book, every theory, every belief he had clung to. And instead, he picked up a pen, and he listened. What came through him was not like ordinary writing. These were not clinical notes or philosophical essays. It was something else, something closer to scripture, to myth, to dream. He began filling pages with images and conversations between himself and the figures that emerged from his unconscious. It was terrifying. One day, a serpent rose up from a dark well and whispered truths to him. Another day, he met a prophetess named Salome. Later, a figure named Philemon appeared, an old man with wings who became Jung's spiritual guide. These weren't hallucinations. They were psychic realities. And this is the moment most people never understand about Carl Jung. He wasn't trying to entertain theories. He was going through an initiation. He was dying to the man he had been, and being reborn as someone else. And out of that descent, out of that chaos, came a book. A book so strange, so powerful, so intimate, that Jung locked it away for the rest of his life. It would not be published until 50 years after his death. He called it Liber Novus, the new book. But the world would come to know it by a different name, the Red Book, bound in thick red leather, filled with paintings, mandalas, and handwritten passages in Gothic calligraphy. It doesn't look like a psychology manual. It looks like a holy relic, like something you'd find hidden beneath a cathedral. But don't mistake its beauty for comfort. The Red Book is dangerous because it does not offer answers. It invites you into the unknown, into yourself. And for Jung, it was not a work of theory. It was a record of his own psychological descent, a descent that nearly broke him. He once said, "I had to become a sick man. I had to become insane. I had to let go of everything I believed about myself. Only then could I find something real." In this first part of our exploration, we stay here with Jung on the edge of madness, the man who had everything: a reputation, a family, a career, a future, choosing to burn it all, to walk into the dark. Why? Because he knew the truth, that the real enemy is not the world. It's not others. It's the shadow we carry inside, the unlived life, the part of us we never face. He saw that clearly, and it terrified him. But instead of running, he followed it. Not many people do that. Even today, we run from silence, from dreams, from pain. We scroll, we numb, we analyze. But Jung sat with it. He let it break him. He let himself become lost, not to lose himself, but to find the self that had been buried beneath all the roles, titles, and expectations. And the Red Book is that journey. It is not a book to be understood. It's a book to be entered. It begins with chaos, with loss, with disintegration. And that's where we begin too. So if you feel like your life is falling apart, if you feel like no one understands what you're going through, if you feel alone in the middle of something that doesn't make sense, you're in the exact place Jung started. This is not the end. It's the descent. And the deeper you go, the more real you become. Jung had made his choice. He would descend. But nothing could prepare him for what came next. This wasn't an academic exercise. This was war. An inner war. One that would drag him into depths most people never even admit exist. The visions became stronger, more vivid, more terrifying. It started with a voice, not outside him, but inside. A subtle whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably other. It spoke in riddles, in symbols, in ancient tones. Jung listened, and then came the images. One night, he dreamt that the entire continent of Europe was drowned in a great flood of blood. Bodies floated in silence. The skies turned dark. The rivers ran red. It was overwhelming, grotesque, and eerily prophetic. This dream came 2 years before World War I erupted. He saw the madness coming, before anyone else. But he didn't stop there, because Jung realized these visions weren't just about the world. They were about him, about what he had buried: the polite doctor, the respected scholar, the father, the friend. Those roles meant nothing here. In the unconscious, masks fall off, titles dissolve. All that's left is truth. And truth, at this level, is violent. Jung began to write every day. He called it active imagination, a method of dialoguing with his unconscious. He would close his eyes, wait, and let the inner world open. It did not disappoint. One moment, he would see a scarlet snake slithering around a golden crown. The next, he'd be talking to a dead man in a cathedral. Then he'd find himself trapped in a cave, surrounded by laughing demons. This wasn't fantasy. It was psychic reality. To Jung, the unconscious wasn't just a metaphor. It was a place, a realm, a living world of symbols, archetypes, and energies. And the deeper he went, the more he realized he was not alone in there, a part he had forgotten. And Jung understood. This was the part of him that wanted to fight, to rage, to break things. The repressed masculine, buried beneath years of social obedience. It terrified him. And yet, he listened. In another vision, he entered a cave filled with rotting corpses. The smell was unbearable. The walls were covered in ancient runes. A voice told him, "This is your forgotten past, the bones of the men you never became." Jung fell to his knees. This wasn't just about childhood trauma. This was archetypal, the death of the known self, the initiation into mystery. And then he met the serpent. Not just any snake. A massive, glowing serpent coiled around a throne made of black glass. It spoke to him in riddles. "You want to rise," it hissed, "but you refuse to fall." Jung knew exactly what it meant. You cannot ascend without first descending. You cannot awaken without first confronting your darkness. You cannot be whole until you've touched the parts of yourself you swore you'd never look at. That is the beginning of individuation, not a feel-good process, not self-improvement, not meditation on a beach. This is blood and fire, death and rebirth. And it always begins with hell. Jung wrote, "The way is not around, but through. Only in the deepest darkness can we find the light." Most people run from this stage. They call it depression. They call it anxiety. They call it burnout. And yes, it feels like those things. But often, it's something deeper, just like it did for Jung. But he didn't escape. He let himself sink, fully. The place where your wounds live. The place where your guilt hides. The place you buried your grief, your rage, your confusion. And when you arrive, it won't feel like clarity. It will feel like madness. But if you stay, something begins to shift. Not quickly, not comfortably, but truthfully. You begin to see mad, strange, wild visions. He watched a man stab himself through the heart to free his soul. He saw the sun turn black and fall from the sky. He walked through deserts and oceans of glass. And always, beneath the madness, he heard the same whisper. Go deeper. He was descending through the layers of his own psyche. Not for curiosity, not for drama, but because he had no choice. To survive the war inside him, he had to understand it. This is what most people misunderstand about Jung. They think he was simply a wise old man with glasses and a pipe. But before he became a teacher, he became a wanderer. Before he found peace, he faced demons. And the first lesson of the Red Book is this: if you want to know who you are, you must go to hell. Not literal hell, but psychological hell. The place where your wounds live. The place where your guilt hides. The place you buried your grief, your rage, your confusion. And when you arrive, it won't feel like clarity. It will feel like madness. But if you stay, something begins to shift. Not quickly, not comfortably, but truthfully. You begin to see that your pain isn't random. It's intelligent It's not there to destroy you. It's there to bring you home. Jung was starting to understand that. By now, Jung had descended far below the surface of ordinary life. But in this new terrain, where visions spoke louder than logic, he encountered something darker than demons, stranger than gods, and more dangerous than madness. He met himself, but not the self we present to the world. This was something raw, animalistic, primitive, violent. It had no charm, no intellect, no smile for society. It was the part of him that had been exiled his entire life, the part he buried under politeness, reputation, and knowledge. This was his shadow. And the shadow does not knock politely. It kicks the door down and stares you in the face. It began with rage. Jung dreamt of standing in a field, his hands soaked in blood, a sword clenched in his fist. Around him lay bodies, friends, family, strangers, all dead. He didn't mourn. He felt powerful, and that terrified him. He woke up shaking, drenched in sweat. What was this part of him that could slaughter without guilt? Was he going mad? No. He was finally meeting the truth. Jung had spent his whole life cultivating the image of a good man, a doctor, a healer, a thinker. But now, the Red Book was showing him something he never expected, that goodness was only half the story. The other half was hidden in shadow, and it was angry. It was the child who had been silenced, the man who wanted to scream, the soul who wanted freedom, even if it meant destruction. And this is what makes Jung different from most people, even most psychologists. He didn't deny the shadow. He didn't medicate it. He didn't bury it. He sat with it. He listened. He let it speak. And what it said changed everything. The shadow told Jung, "You are not whole. You are not honest. You wear the skin of a saint. But inside, you burn like a wolf." And it was true, because wholeness is not light without dark. It's both. It's not the absence of anger, lust, greed, jealousy. It's the integration of those forces. The Red Book reveals this brutally. Jung records conversations with terrifying figures, murderers, liars, beasts, all of whom are parts of himself. In one vision, he walks through a ruined temple. At the altar, he finds a man shackled, blindfolded, screaming. He asks, "Who are you?" The man replies, "I am the truth you couldn't bear to see." Jung wrote, "To confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light. But most people will run from this. They would rather be good than whole. And that's the modern tragedy. We all want to be liked, approved, seen as moral. But beneath that performance lives everything we've disowned. The jealousy we pretend we don't feel. The cruelty we secretly fantasize about. The sexual desire we're ashamed to admit. The ambition we suppress to fit in. All of that, every rejected emotion, instinct, and urge, becomes the shadow. And the more you ignore it, the more powerful it becomes. Not just inside, but outside. Because the shadow doesn't just live in us. It projects. You start to see it in others. You hate the arrogant man because he mirrors your own hidden pride. You judge the promiscuous woman because she reflects your own suppressed desire. You resent the successful friend because they act out the ambition you buried, and you think the problem is them. But the Red Book says otherwise. Jung realized that until you integrate the shadow, it will control you from the dark. It will leak out in passive aggression, in depression, in addiction, in toxic relationships. Or worse, it will show up in your spirituality. Jung warned of this. He said, "People will wear the mask of holiness to avoid facing the beast inside. But real healing, real awakening, it begins with this moment, facing the beast." And that's what Jung did. In one vision, he meets a demon with black wings, flaming eyes, and a crown of bone. The demon laughs and says, "You called me a monster, but I am the part of you that tells the truth." Jung bows, not out of fear, but respect. He begins to understand these terrifying parts of the psyche are not evil. They are wounded, abandoned, forgotten, and they want to return home. That's the paradox of the shadow. It is the enemy you must love, the dragon you must ride. Not kill, but integrate. Jung didn't destroy his shadow. He invited it into the circle of his being. He learned from it. He wrote, "The shadow is 90% pure gold, because inside your darkness lives your truth, your power, your voice, your freedom. Not the polite version of you, the real you." And this is where the Red Book becomes more than a mystical diary. It becomes a manual for transformation. It doesn't tell you to be better. It tells you to be whole. And to be whole, you must face what you fear most, yourself. In the quiet, in the dark, with no mask, no excuse, no filter. That's what Jung did. And it nearly destroyed him. But on the other side of that destruction, something new began to emerge. After Jung faced the darkness within, the murderer, the liar, the beast, he expected maybe peace, or silence, or at least some sense of order. Instead, he met God. But not the God you imagine, not the one from Sunday sermons, not a man in the sky, not a father figure with thunder in his voice. This God was something far more ancient, far more intimate, and far more disturbing. It began with a vision. Jung stood in a vast desert beneath a dark red sky. The sun had collapsed. In its place hovered a radiant sphere of light. And from that light, a voice emerged. It didn't say, "I love you." It said, "I am inside you, and you are terrified of me." This is where Jung's Red Book shifts from psychological to mystical. Because what Jung discovered, what he was shown, was that God is not outside. God is not in churches or clouds. God is within the unconscious itself, not a being, but a symbol, a force, a psychic presence that lives at the deepest level of the human soul. And it doesn't speak in commandments. It speaks in fire, in dreams, in pain. It speaks in truth. One of Jung's most famous visions from the Red Book is his encounter with Izdubar, a giant, mythological figure who represents the ancient god image. Powerful, heroic, radiant. But as Jung approaches him, Izdubar begins to shrink. he weakens, fades, becomes small and fragile. Jung realizes the old God is dying, not because God doesn't exist, but because the image of God, the outer projection, is collapsing. The divine is not leaving. It's going inward. And this terrified Jung, because it meant that divinity was no longer something you could worship from a distance. It had to be lived, carried, faced. He wrote, "God is no longer beyond. He is within. But he comes with both creation and destruction. Because the divine is not just love, it's also death, not evil, but annihilation, of lies, of ego, of the false self." This is why Jung warned that spiritual encounters are not always beautiful. Sometimes they break you, because they show you what you've been avoiding, that there is something larger inside you than your own personality, something vast and holy, but not in the way religion teaches. Jung didn't become a preacher. He didn't create a new church. He simply recorded what he saw. And what he saw was this: the self is the new temple. The Red Book shows this again and again. Visions of divine figures, winged beings, luminous flames, cosmic wombs, appearing not as external events, but internal truths. He begins to understand that the symbols of religion, Christ, the cross, the snake, the tree, the sacrifice, are not historical facts. They are psychological realities. They live within us. And until we decode their meaning, we will remain divided, worshipping something we do not understand. In one vision, Jung sees a godlike figure chained in a cave. The figure whispers, "They pray to me, but they don't know me. They wear crosses, but they haven't died yet." Jung knew what that meant. True spirituality is not belief. It is transformation, not memorizing verses, but dying to your false self so that something real can be born. And this is why Jung was afraid to publish the Red Book, because he knew what it would sound like: insanity, heresy, ego. But he wasn't claiming to be divine. He was saying we all are, not in a narcissistic way, but in a responsible way. We carry the divine within us, and that means we are responsible for the chaos we avoid, the God we ignore, the suffering we refuse to integrate. Jung wrote, "When you withdraw the God into yourself, you become the bearer of the unbearable. This is the mystical burden, to no longer project the sacred onto others, but to embody it, to hold the light and the darkness, to live symbolically, to walk through life not as a tourist, but as a temple." Most people are not ready for that, and Jung knew it. He once said, "The gods have become diseases. What we once called divine visitations, we now call neurosis." Because modern man doesn't know how to deal with the divine. We've lost the language of symbols. We reduce everything to logic. But the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in myth, in dreams, in blood, in silence. And that's what the Red Book gives us back, the lost language of the soul. It doesn't offer conclusions. It offers confrontations. And one of the deepest confrontations Jung experienced was this: God is not who you think. He's not safe. He's not polite. He's not distant. He is within you. And if you really meet him, he will break you. But on the other side of that breaking, something else appears, something softer, stranger. The feminine, the soul. Salome, after fire comes water. After the storm of God comes the whisper of the soul. Jung had gone to the underworld. He had faced the beast. He had seen the divine. But something was still missing, something deeply human and deeply mysterious. He had not yet met her, and she was waiting. One night, in a vision, Jung found himself in a vast crimson desert. The sky was violet. The air was thick. He wandered for hours until he came upon two figures, an old man with long white hair and a young blind woman dressed in flowing robes. The man introduced himself as Elijah. The woman was Salome. Yes, that Salome, the mythic figure known for seducing and destroying. In Christian legend, she is the one who danced for King Herod and demanded the head of John the Baptist. But here, in Jung's inner world, she wasn't seductive. She wasn't evil. She was blind, and she spoke with a calm, strange, knowing voice. Jung was shocked. What was she doing here? Why had his unconscious summoned her? And then she said something he would never forget. "I love you." Jung was stunned. Love? From the darkest corner of myth? From the symbol of temptation and death? It didn't make sense. But that's the point. Because Salome didn't come to make sense. She came to awaken something Jung had buried his whole life, his feminine soul. In Jungian psychology, this is called the anima, the unconscious feminine side of a man. And for women, the masculine equivalent is the animus. These are not just gendered traits. They are archetypal energies. The anima is emotion, intuition, surrender, mystery, beauty, chaos. Everything our rational world tries to suppress. And Jung had suppressed her. For years, he had lived in his mind. Ideas, science, order, discipline, masculine structure. But now, in the Red Book, his soul had taken a different shape, and it wore the face of Salome. She didn't demand anything. She didn't argue. She just stood there and said, "I see you. Even though I'm blind, I see you." That line shattered something in Jung, because that's what the soul does. It sees you not with eyes, but with feeling. It doesn't want to fix you, or save you, or punish you. It wants to know you, to touch the parts of you no one else ever did. This is the real reason most people run from their anima, because she doesn't play by your rules. She doesn't care about your career, your status, your knowledge. She wants your truth, and to meet her, you must surrender. And Jung struggled. He wanted to push her away, question her, intellectualize her. But it didn't work, because the feminine is not something you control. It's something you honor. That's when the visions became more intimate. Jung began to see Salome in different forms, sometimes as a lover, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a serpent or a ghost or a flame, always mysterious, always just out of reach. She would appear in silence, and then disappear, leaving only questions. What does it mean to love the soul? What does it mean to listen, not with ears, but with the heart? What does it mean to feel, without knowing why? The Red Book doesn't give you answers, but it shows you what Jung discovered, that true transformation does not happen through force. It happens through feminine surrender, not weakness, but softness, the ability to hold contradiction, to weep, to not know, to be broken and still beautiful. This is what Salome taught Jung, and this is what the anima teaches all of us. In a world obsessed with control, logic, and dominance, the anima is revolution. She says, sit down, breathe, listen, feel. And that is unbearable for the modern mind, because we are terrified of stillness, terrified of feeling too much. But the Red Book shows us, if you reject the feminine within, you will never be whole. You may be successful, smart, respected, but you will be lonely, disconnected, soulless. Because the soul is feminine. It doesn't arrive through ambition. It arrives through surrender, through moments of silence at night when no one is watching, and the tears finally fall, through those strange, quiet times when something inside you says, there is more than this. There must be more. That voice, that ache, that mystery, that's her. That's the Salome in you. And if you listen, your life will begin to change. You'll start noticing beauty in places you never did. You'll stop needing to prove anything. You'll start feeling things you thought you'd buried forever. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start hearing your soul again. Jung once wrote, the anima is the bridge to the self. To ignore her is to remain lost. He wasn't being poetic. He was being honest. Because after Salome appeared, something else came. Someone who would become Jung's inner mentor. A figure who would shape the rest of his journey. And he didn't arrive with fire, or fury, or seduction. He arrived with wisdom. His name was Philemon, and he would become after the storm of the shadow and the mystery of Salome. Jung was no longer the man he once was. His inner world had become louder than the outer one. But as his psyche descended deeper into chaos, something unusual happened. A figure appeared, not to confuse or destroy, but to teach. This was not a god, nor a demon, nor a mythic symbol. This was a guide, a presence with calm eyes and infinite patience. His name was Philemon. And to Jung, he was more than just a character in a dream. He was a spiritual fact. Philemon emerged one afternoon during a vision in Jung's garden. A tall man with a white beard, a blue robe, and the wings of a kingfisher. He didn't speak like the others. He didn't provoke, seduce, or scream. He simply knew. Jung felt it instantly. This was wisdom. Ancient, grounded, terrifying in its depth. Philemon told Jung something that would reshape his entire understanding of psychology. You think your thoughts are yours. They are not. They come from the soul. That line hit Jung like thunder, because all this time, he believed he was the thinker, the mind behind the thoughts. But Philemon revealed the deeper truth. The ego does not invent. It receives. Our thoughts, emotions, and ideas are not created by the conscious self. They arise from somewhere deeper. The unconscious, the collective, the soul. And Philemon? He was the voice of that soul. Not sentimental, not personal, but archetypal. He represented inner wisdom, the kind that doesn't change with opinion or mood, the kind that speaks in timeless symbols and truths. And Jung listened. For the first time, he stopped trying to analyze his visions and started learning from them. He wrote pages and pages of dialogues with Philemon, recorded faithfully in the Red Book. It wasn't a script. It was a relationship. Like student and teacher, Philemon would challenge Jung, correct him, and sometimes remain silent for days, forcing Jung to reflect more deeply. One day, Philemon said, "Your truth is too loud. Silence it, and you will finally hear." Another day, he said, "Do not become what they want you to be. Become what your soul already is." These weren't lessons from a textbook. They were initiations, because Philemon didn't just teach Jung ideas. He trained him to listen, not to the world, but to the inner teacher. And this is what most people miss about Jung's legacy. They think he was a theorist, but he was a mystic, a student of inner reality. And Philemon was his professor, not just of knowledge, but of being. You see, every person has a Philemon inside them, a voice, a knowing, a presence that doesn't shout, but waits for you to get quiet enough, broken enough, still enough. And when you do, it speaks, not with logic, but with clarity. This is what Jung discovered, that the psyche is not a problem to solve, but a world to explore. And in that world, there are guides. We call them imaginary or irrational because we're afraid of them. But they are more real than your job, your resume, your social media profile. They are ancient. Philemon was not just a mentor. He became Jung's inner compass. Whenever Jung faced a moral conflict, a life question, a spiritual mystery, he asked Philemon. And Philemon would respond with paradox. Because wisdom is never black and white. He once told Jung, "Do not try to become light. Become dark until your light shines from it." That line captures the essence of the Red Book. That healing is not about escaping the dark. It's about integrating it. Jung began to change. He became quieter, slower, more symbolic in his life. He spoke less in theories and more in images. He began to paint mandalas, circles filled with shapes and symbols, which Philemon said were maps of the self, not decoration, not art, guidance. And here's the key. Jung didn't worship Philemon. He didn't make him a god. He knew Philemon was a part of himself, a deeper part, a wiser part, but still him. That's individuation, not escaping your ego, but expanding it until it contains all of you. Your shadow, your anima, your divine spark, and your inner teacher, all sitting at the same table. Jung once said, "Philemon was a force, a voice. He said things I had never thought, and yet I had always known them." That's the mystery. Wisdom doesn't come from learning something new. It comes from remembering what you forgot. And that's what Philemon does. He reminds you of who you were before the world told you who to be. You see, most people are searching for answers. But the Red Book shows us the answer is already in you. You're just not quiet enough to hear it, not broken enough to let it speak, not brave enough to trust it. But when you are, Philemon appears, and life begins to change. You stop chasing. You start listening. You stop performing. You start being. You stop looking for teachers, Because you realize you've always had one. Right there, Jung had gone further into the soul than most people ever dare. He had faced his shadow. He had bowed before the divine. He had spoken with his feminine soul and learned from the wise inner spirit of Philemon. But now, something else had to happen. Something final. Something terrifying. The death of the ego. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally. In his visions, Jung was shown a truth that shattered him. He had to let go of the man he thought he was. The thinker, the father, the doctor, the explorer, the hero of his own story. It all had to go, because the ego is not the self. It's the mask, the avatar we build to survive the world. It's useful, necessary even, but eventually, if you want to be whole, you must stop being the mask and face what's underneath. Jung wrote, "I must kill the hero in myself. I must become nothing, so I may finally see everything." And so, in the Red Book, he staged his own symbolic death. One night, in a vision, he found himself climbing a mountain. At the peak stood a throne carved from bone. A voice told him, "This is your seat, the seat of the hero." Jung approached, but as he reached for the throne, it shattered into dust, and from behind him came a voice. "You were never meant to sit here. You were meant to fall." That vision broke him, because it meant everything he had built, even spiritually, was still rooted in ego. Even the search for enlightenment had become a performance. He realized he had been trying to be someone, even on the spiritual path. And now he had to unbe. So he did something few people ever do. He let himself die. He stopped trying to be right, stopped trying to lead, stopped trying to prove, and he entered a space of total emptiness. No goals, no identity, no future, just silence. He called it being nothing. And he stayed there. He didn't rush to rebuild. He didn't escape into ideas. He just sat in the ruin. And in that ruin, something extraordinary happened. He found peace. Not the peace of pleasure or accomplishment, the peace of truth, that he didn't need to be anything, because what he is already is enough. And this is the paradox most people miss. The ego is afraid of death, but the self is born through it. It's not the end. It's the beginning. It's the moment when you stop trying to fix yourself and start loving what you are, all of it. The broken, the angry, the lonely, the confused, the sacred. It's all you. And it's all divine. Jung once wrote, "To become what you are, you must cease to be what you pretend to be." He wasn't talking about giving up your life. He was talking about giving up the false self, the one built on fear, on validation, on image. Because as long as you are holding on to that, you cannot hear your soul. It's like trying to meditate while shouting. The ego shouts, but the self whispers. And when Jung silenced the ego, the whisper came through. He began to write differently, feel differently. He no longer spoke from ideas, but from symbols, from intuition, from a place beyond words. And this wasn't the end of his journey. It was the rebirth. Because ego death is not about disappearing. It's about reorganizing. Instead of the ego sitting on the throne, the self does. The ego still exists, but now it serves something deeper, something eternal. This is the secret of individuation. Not destroying your personality, but realigning it. Not escaping your humanity, but embracing it through the soul. Most people never reach this point, because ego death is terrifying. It feels like insanity, like losing control, like floating in nothingness. And that's exactly what it is. But Jung shows us that if you have the courage to stay there, to truly let go, what you find is not emptiness. What you find is God. Not the old God, but the God within. The one made of both light and shadow, of both love and destruction, of both silence and power. The God that is the self. And Jung? He met that God face to face. In another vision, he stood at the bottom of a black well. Above him, no light. Below him, no ground. Only a voice that said, "You are not Carl Jung. You never were. You are the eternal question, seeking its own answer." And Jung understood. He was not a man. He was a journey, a process, an unfolding. And so are you. You are not your name, not your job, not your past. You are the path you are walking. And ego death is the gate. It is not the end of your identity. It is the beginning of your truth. And once Jung passed through that gate, something else happened. His soul began to speak. Not in riddles, not in symbols. After the ego dies, there is a strange silence. A space where the mind stops screaming. Where the masks fall. Where ambition dissolves. Most people fear this space. They mistake it for depression, boredom, or failure. But Jung discovered something else. This is the place where the soul begins to speak, not through visions, not through dreams, but through presence, through something soft and intimate and real. In the Red Book, this is where Jung's journey becomes less about chaos and more about communion. He begins a series of direct dialogues with his soul, not metaphorically, not symbolically. He speaks to her. He calls her my soul, as if addressing a person he once abandoned and is now returning to. And her voice is not what you might expect. She is not angry. She is not dramatic. She is quiet, wounded, deep, honest, and above all, feminine. She tells him, "You've run from me your whole life. You've built empires of the mind, but you never sat with me. You never asked what I feel." And Jung realizes something horrifying, that in all his efforts to understand the unconscious, to map the psyche, to conquer the darkness, he never truly listened. He was always doing, always thinking, always controlling. But the soul doesn't want control. It wants intimacy. It wants relationship. So Jung begins to sit with her, to let her speak. He stops analyzing. He starts feeling. And the soul begins to reveal things no book could teach him. She tells him, "I am not your servant. I am not your goal. I am your mirror. If you abandon me, I will become your pain. If you embrace me, I will become your life." That line, rewrote Jung's entire understanding of healing. Because most people treat the soul like a trophy, something to earn, something to possess. But the soul is not a possession. It's a presence. And you don't find it through effort. You find it through surrender, through grief, through gentleness. The soul is the part of you that cries quietly in the middle of the night and doesn't know why. It's the part that still believes in beauty, even after everything has fallen apart. It's the part that aches when you lie to yourself. And it's always been there, waiting, watching. Jung wrote, my soul, where are you? Have you abandoned me? Do I have to return to myself?" And the answer was yes. Because to hear the soul, you have to return, not forward, back, to the boy who was silenced, to the girl who was misunderstood, to the dream you let die because the world told you it wasn't realistic. The soul lives there, in the forgotten, in the quiet, in the ache. And this is where Jung's writing in the Red Book becomes almost scriptural. It's no longer theory or vision. It's poetry, prayer, dialogue. He writes pages where he speaks and then lets the soul respond. And the soul doesn't give him goals. She gives him truth, hard truths, like, you don't know how to love. You are more afraid of joy than pain. You keep searching for meaning, but you've never listened to silence. Each line is like a crack in the armor, and Jung lets it break him, because now he understands. The soul is not here to make you feel good. It's here to make you real. And being real is painful. But it's the only way home. You see, the soul doesn't want your success. It wants your surrender. It doesn't want your plans. It wants your presence. It doesn't want your perfection. It wants your truth. And when you finally give it that, when you stop pretending, stop performing, stop pushing, something magical happens. You feel alive again, not in a manic way, but in a deep, warm, grounded way, like standing barefoot on the earth, like hearing music in silence, like recognizing yourself in the mirror for the first time. Jung called this soul return, and it's the real turning point in the Red Book, because everything before was descent. But this is the beginning of wholeness. And he didn't need a church or a philosophy or a movement. He just needed to sit with himself and ask, what is the truth of my life right now? Not the story, not the goals, not the trauma, the truth. And that question is terrifying, because once you hear the answer, you can never go back. You can't pretend anymore. You can't stay asleep. You have to live differently. You have to stop betraying yourself. And that's exactly what Jung began to do. He started living with his soul. He no longer followed external paths. He trusted the inner compass. He no longer sought approval. He listened to resonance. He no longer asked, what should I do? He asked, what feels alive to me? Carl Jung had just done something unimaginable. He descended into madness, faced the darkness within, spoke with demons, gods, serpents, and soul guides, and somehow came back with a map. That map was the Red Book, a glowing red leather volume over 200 pages, handwritten in Gothic script, filled with surreal artwork, mandalas, visions, and sacred dialogues with the soul. But when it was done, Jung didn't publish it. He didn't share it with his students. He didn't bring it to his lectures. He didn't even mention it in his later books. He took this priceless psychological treasure and locked it away in a drawer for the rest of his life. Why? Because Jung wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't chasing clicks or followers or legacy. He knew what this book really was. Too raw, too personal, too powerful, and too far ahead of its time. You have to understand, the Red Book wasn't a collection of ideas. It was a record of inner death and rebirth. A psychic descent so real, so dangerous, so intimate, that even Jung couldn't bring himself to explain it publicly. He once said, "I knew the world was not ready. They would either think I was a prophet or mad." And he was right. Because the Red Book isn't psychology. It's a spiritual weapon, a mirror, a confession, a diary of what happens when a man goes deep enough to shatter every identity and survive. But Jung also knew something else. If he shared this too early, it wouldn't just be misunderstood. It would be destroyed, watered down, dismissed, or worse, used as proof he had gone insane. Remember, this was the early 1900s. People didn't talk about dreams, symbols, synchronicity, or the soul. They believed in facts, science, rationality. And here was Jung scribbling about ancient gods, inner teachers, bleeding serpents, and conversations with his soul. Even his closest students might have walked away. So he made a choice. He continued his public work, published books, gave lectures, taught theories. But behind all of it sat the Red Book, waiting. He didn't even show it to his children, because to Jung, this book was sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a psychological sense. It was too alive, too honest, too much. And maybe he wasn't protecting the world from the book. Maybe he was protecting the book from the world, because some things are not meant to be consumed. They're meant to be experienced. You see, the Red Book isn't something you read once and understand. It's something you feel. It destabilizes you. It forces you to ask questions you don't want answers to. Questions like, what if the God I've been looking for is inside me? What if my anxiety is actually a message from my soul? What if I've spent my entire life running from myself? That's not light reading. That's psychic surgery. And Jung respected that process too much to throw it into the spotlight. But deep down, he must have known. One day, the world would be ready. And that day didn't come until 2009, 50 years after his death. That's when Jung's family finally allowed the Red Book to be published. And when it was, everything changed. Suddenly, the world saw the side of Jung no one had dared to imagine. Not the scholar, not the doctor, not the psychologist, but the mystic. The man who stared into the abyss and saw the self. And for those who read it, not just skimmed it, but entered it, the Red Book became something else entirely. A companion, a spiritual guide, a whisper from the other side of suffering. But even today, most people don't finish it, because it's not meant to be finished. It's meant to initiate, to wake you up, to break something open inside you that you didn't even know was sleeping. And that's why Jung didn't publish it, because it wasn't a conclusion. It was an invitation to do what he did, to stop pretending, to stop chasing, to stop performing. And finally, go inward, to meet the parts of yourself that terrify you, to sit with the visions, to speak to your soul, to die, metaphorically, and to be reborn, not as someone else, but as who you were always meant to be. And that's the final secret of the Red Book. It's not about Jung, it's about you. That's why he called it Liber Novus, the new book. Not his new book, your new book, the beginning of your real life. So the question now is not why Jung hid it. The question is, what will you do with it now that it's here? Because the Red Book has surfaced. The mirror has been uncovered. The gate has been opened. You've walked through fire with Carl Jung. You've seen what happens when a man dares to go inward, so deep that he loses everything he thought he was, and finds something he never imagined. But this was never just about him. This was always about you. Because the Red Book isn't a biography. It's a mirror. And if you've made it this far, that mirror is now right in front of you. So the only question left is this: what will you do with it? You may not have visions of ancient prophets. You may not hear voices in the garden or speak with glowing serpents. But every day, your soul is speaking. Through discomfort, through dreams, through anxiety, through that quiet ache in your chest that says, "This isn't who I really am." And that's where your Red Book begins. Not in Switzerland, not in the past, but right now, in the silent moments between distractions, in the quiet hours when the masks fall off, in the decisions you keep postponing because they'd force you to finally be honest. The Red Book teaches us one thing above all else. You cannot become whole until you go to war with your false self, not with violence, but with awareness, with compassion, with presence. It shows you that your shadow is not your enemy. It's your key. That your breakdowns are not failures. They're invitations. That your longing is not a weakness. It's a map. The Red Book doesn't want you to be perfect. It wants you to be real. And that means going back to the places you've avoided, the memories that still sting, the grief you never cried, the guilt you buried with a smile, the parts of yourself you disowned just to be loved. Jung showed us, if you're willing to face them, something awakens. Not a new version of you, but the original version. The you before the world told you who to be. The you who didn't need permission to feel, to believe, to speak, to dream. That's individuation. It's not success. It's not healing. It's homecoming. And you don't need a red leather book to start. You just need silence. And a question. Start there. What am I avoiding? What do I know deep down, but won't admit? What part of me needs to die so something real can live? The Red Book teaches you that your soul will answer, but only if you ask with your whole heart, not for information, but for transformation. You see, this was never a book. It's a door to the self, to the sacred, to the truth. And you don't need to understand it. You just need to walk through it. And once you do, You won't see life the same way again. You'll stop chasing things that don't matter. You'll stop needing validation from people who don't know your soul. You'll stop running from the loneliness, because now you'll know it was your soul trying to speak all along. And in its voice, you'll find power. Not the loud, aggressive power we're taught to chase, but the quiet, grounded power of someone who knows who they are, and who no longer needs to prove it. That's the real awakening. To look in the mirror and no longer see a project to fix, but a person to love. Carl Jung did not write the Red Book to impress the world. He wrote it because he had to. Because something inside him was breaking, and something deeper was being born. You may be in that moment now. Maybe the old life doesn't fit. Maybe the dreams you were chasing don't feel right anymore. Maybe you're waking up at 2 a.m. wondering why you feel so lost, when you've done everything right. Good. That's the moment. That's where it starts. That's your descent. Don't fight it. Don't numb it. Follow it. Let it break you open. Let it show you what's been waiting inside all along. Because beyond the fear, beyond the silence, beyond the ego, there's someone waiting. You, the real you. And just like Jung, you'll realize you never needed to be someone else. You just needed to return, to remember, to listen. And when you do, your own Red Book begins. If this video spoke to you, if something cracked open inside you, leave a comment and finish this sentence. My soul is trying to tell me that. We'll be reading through every answer, because this isn't just a video. This is a community of awakening. Like the video. Subscribe to Psychatic for more deep dives like this. And if you believe more people need to hear what Jung was too afraid to publish in his lifetime, share this video. Your soul is real. Your truth is sacred. And your journey is just beginning.